So we're here.
Yeah.
Well, we're, let's just go ahead and get started if you folks don't mind. It's after 4:30, so we'll just get the ball rolling if we could. Mr. Mayor is going to be absent tonight. He's got some other stuff going, so you get me. So put your seatbelts on and let's do this, shall we? Mr. City Manager, council meeting follow-up. I know you weren't here, and by the way, Liz did a wonderful job in with you being gone. So just so you know, she really did.
Appreciate that. I'll
Yep.
let her know that.
So I don't know if there's anything you need to touch on from last week, or if anybody else does.
I don't know that I have anything, Your Honor. I'm not sure that I do. But
Anybody else have anything from last week? No? Well, this is going to be super easy tonight, so we will move on to credit card fees, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Good to be with you tonight. The question before you tonight is whether or not credit card fees ought to be considered differently than what we've done in the past, or what we're currently doing, I should say. In most cases, the city takes quite a bit of cost as it relates to the fees that we incur to offer credit card services for those who want to come and pay their bills, most specifically as it relates to the utilities and so forth. And so the question before you this evening is whether or not those expenses to the utilities ought to be saved. And again, I'm using utilities as an example, but we have this pervasive throughout the organization. Or if we should pass those costs along like many of our counterparts do throughout the area and throughout Wyoming and so forth. And so that fundamentally is the question. And so for some of the hard detail, however, I'd really like to defer to Jill to walk us through that. Her and Brandy have to deal with this question quite a bit. So I will let those ladies guide us through this, if that's okay.
Absolutely, please.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, or Mr. I guess Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you for having me tonight. So we did actually have a meeting with the Finance Committee back in July, and we talked about this subject. And the proposal at that time was we would like to transition people from, or actually the city not paying the credit card fees, but having the customer pay that. So this does have a budgetary impact, as the city manager has said. Our credit card fees for the fiscal year 23 total $192,000. So recreation is part of that, but they are not part of our processing that we're in this proposal for. So we have to reduce it by $24,000. But the total that we're looking at as an estimated budgetary savings would be about $168,000 if we transition this from the city absorbing these over to customer paying those. I think in order though to kind of see who does this impact, Claire, would you pull up for me number 1? I numbered them, so hopefully that'll make it easy. No. That one. Perfect. So this is a chart. We pull this out of our it's called Tyler Cashiering. So all of the payments that come into the city run through this, with the exception of a few departments. So as you can see, most people still pay their bills with a check. So not as many people pay it with a card. This is looking at total dollars. So most of the dollars that come into the city are coming in with a check. So our dollars here are very small. If we look at the total transactions, however, the checks are still pretty high. They're still at 54%, but our credit cards go up to 29%. So 29% of the transactions coming through our credit card, but only 2% of the dollars are. So we're getting a lot of transactions for low dollars. So just to think about how that impacts people, because when the fees are charged to us, most of the things that people pay for with a credit card, we are charged like a 2 to 3%, something like that. Utility bills are different. We actually get a discount for our utility bills. They only charge us 1.3%. So if we were to change over to where the customer pays this fee, they're going to be charged 2.95%. Doesn't matter what kind of bill they're paying, that's what they're going to be charged. So there is a difference in what we pay versus what they pay. However, by transitioning this to the customer, we would pay nothing, but they would pay a little bit more. So just be aware of that. I also have some information that's related to by department. If you'd like to see that, I'm happy to share that. But the gist of the conversation is basically we would like to transition this over to the customer. It would save us on the budget. I think it's something also that is universally kind of accepted more so than it has been in the past. So I think that this is a good time to do this. So you have three options of what you could do. You could transition some departments, because we have quite a few departments that all use the same processor. Or you could do everybody, or you could do nobody. It would be really up to you, and I'd be happy to take that direction.
Kyle.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem. And thank you, Jill, for the information. So I see that the fees that we have budgeted for fiscal year 23 are $192,576. Curious, do you have the numbers for fiscal year 22, what the actuals were?
I do not, and it's a little bit harder to pull it out of the fiscal year 22. In fiscal year 22, we kind of lumped them all into contractual services. So we didn't have a separate line in our budget for credit card fees, which we do in the fiscal year 23 budget. So, I mean, we can certainly get that for you, but it will take a little bit more digging.
Thank you. Follow up if I may.
Please.
Thank you. You stated that the processing charges that the city incurs is 1.3%. It seemed like across the board. So my question is, why would we not pass that straight through to the resident? Why would they be charged the 2.95% above the 1.3% that we're being charged?
Great question. Actually, the Visa MasterCard rules do not allow us to do that. We have to go through a third party processor. And how it would work is somebody would come in to pay their bill, they would swipe their card, we would get the amount for the bill, and the credit card processor would get the fee. So it would be a third party, so it kind of totally separates it. We can't charge them a fee. It's considered a convenience fee.
For clarification, so where does the 1.3% come into that transaction?
So the 1.3% right now is what we are charged. So when I come in and I pay my utility bill and I use my credit card, I pay my bill for $50 or whatever it is. The credit card company bills the city for the 1.3%. One additional follow-up to that. So in charging the customer the 2.95%, there's also a minimum charge. So if the customer came in and their bill was only $50, they would still be charged $2. So until you hit $68, you're going to be charged $2 for every transaction.
Thank you.
Of course.
Lisa?
I just want to say, I think that the public is getting more and more accustomed to having these fees pushed off onto them. And so I think that it's more than reasonable to do that. It's just we offer the same services. So if somebody's needing to use their credit card, the only problem is that these services also, debit cards are also recognized as credit cards. And so, and they charge 2.95%, at least for my tenants. But so we just say, this is how much you're charging and this is how much your fee is. Or they can bring in funds a different way, so they don't have to use a credit card. But as long as they know that they have to pay these fees, I don't think that the public is going to have much of a pushback, but they absolutely should have to pay these fees.
Steve?
Thank you. Could you state again what you said about paying the fees and not paying the fees that MasterCard is requiring?
Run that by me one more time.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understand your question. I'm sorry.
If I get a bill and I pay cash for it, it's one amount. But if I turn around and pay it with a credit card, I get I don't remember what it's called exactly, but I get a service charge
Yes.
that's added on. Now,
That is
can we do that?
We cannot do that.
And that's what I was asking is, we can't, and why can't we do that?
So if I could defer to Brandy. Brandy has really done a lot of research on this project for me. So she can help shed some light on that one.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, Council members. So I've worked a lot with our card processor, which is currently CardPoint, to narrow down all of these different aspects of it. So I think I can provide a little bit of clarification on your question as well. So I'll start with that. We get a discount because Visa, MasterCard, and those kind of not processors, but card providers have a rule that if you are a utility company, you get this special deal and have a lower interest rate. So that cannot be, because of their rules, be passed on to the customer. We're not able to do that, unfortunately. And then, as for your question, can you repeat it one more time? Sorry.
Why can't we send out a bill that says cash, XYZ dollars, credit card, it would be XYZ plus 2.95%.
So we probably could add that onto, I like a note on our, I don't know that we'd be able to calculate it out for each bill to our bills, just because of the limitations of our accounting system. But we could provide a note that says that you'll have this extra fee, but we're not allowed to charge that. The rules require, and not our rules, but the processing rules require that the fee be processed and received by a third party. So we can't receive it, because then it's considered a convenience fee that we're charging, even if we pass it on to the card processor and then they pass it on to the, like Visa card or MasterCard. So the rules say that this third party processor has to receive those monies and then pay the card company.
So you could put a line on there that says non-cash adjustment?
So BDS is who we'll be working with, and it'll all be built into their system. So any receipts that we print out of our system will include the amount of our bill that they're paying, plus the service fee that the credit card service fee that they will be paying. So it'll be broke down on their receipt. It'll be broke down on their receipts that they receive through the online system as well. So they're going to have that breakdown, and it may look like we're collecting it, but we won't collect it. The city won't collect it. We don't even touch it. We don't see it. It goes to.
But you think we would,
By all means.
still part of this discussion. So you think we would be able, though, just like this receipt, to put on their cash and credit card so that they know which it is, and they could make their choice whether they're willing to pay for it or not, but still wind up being able to pass it on to the customer?
Oh, it says cash on your receipt. I think I misunderstood.
Oh, yeah,
the
it's,
answer.
no, I can show you this, but yeah. Base amount and then non-cash adjustment, which I know good and well that's what that is, because I paid by a credit card.
Oh, yeah, so it'll say non-cash adjustment or
Yeah,
fee.
that
I
was
think-
lunch today.
Yeah.
So,
And if they're paying with us over the phone, we will notify them that there will be an additional fee that will be calculated into it, and when we process it, we'll be able to tell them what that additional fee is.
okay.
And we have the ways within our system to send them an email receipt or print it out for them and mail it out to them. So they'll have that on their receipt.
And then I guess what concerns me too is, as a follow-up,
Of course.
off on a little bit different, but I noticed in there that it said that you were going to be working to where community development would go to all card. For people in their bigger building permits and things, that starts to get a little expensive.
It does, and thank you for that question. Actually, Liz had reached out and she was concerned about that as well. Again, we don't have to convert everybody to this model. We can convert some. We can leave community development out of this conversion if you choose to do so. Some of the building permits are extremely expensive. And a lot of times, even though the contractor pays for the permit, they get that money back, of course, with the fees and everything included.
Oh, yeah.
However, they sometimes don't get it back for quite some time. So they did have concerns about that, and if truly there is no other way to pay except by a card, then that may be something that you want to exclude.
Well, and I was wondering if you could do something similar to what I was talking about, is if you wanna pay it cash, here's your charge. If you wanna put it on plastic, here's the 2.95%, so.
And it sounds like we can do that. The one concern that I know community development had as well was that to pay by cash or a check really delays the processing of the permit. So they were trying to alleviate that as well.
I would tell the contractor to do a better job of planning an organization. So, you can tell my sympathy. Do what?
Well, I have a couple points that weren't brought up, and one is I know even if you go to buy license plates through the county and pay your sales tax, if you don't have a check, you have to use your card, and you pay a fee there. I know if you use your ATM card, generally at any ATM that's not owned by your bank, you're paying a fee to get your own money. I think the public is quite used to this. I'd be curious why we're not involving the recreation department as well, instead of eating that 24,000. And the last thing I wanted to say is they can always write a check because they don't have to pay the fees if they don't want to use their card. And don't forget, most people with cards, I know mine, have tremendous rewards that far outweigh any fees I pay through my credit card. So I don't think this is going to put a strain on the public. I think they're already doing it. Most people are. And I think that money would be better suited for things in the city. And I don't think all taxpayers should be paying for those that decide they want to use a credit card. I don't think that's fair either. Just a couple points that weren't brought up. So.
Agreed, and to answer your question on the recreation piece, they actually use a different processor than the one that we use here in City Hall. So I know Zulema has been looking at, when she's doing her cost recovery, possibly, again, transferring that fee to the customer to help with her subsidies.
Anything else from anyone? Questions? Sir?
I have seen all of my clients over the last 5 years either increase their fees by 3% or add that 2.95% onto their credit card. So like you said, people are used to it. It's become the norm. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't follow suit.
Jai?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm fine with it conceptually, but I do wonder, in terms of making that decision about community development, are we deciding now that, are we just deciding generally, yes, we want to move forward with this, and then we determine whether it's all entities or just some? Is that a conversation for later?
I'll defer to the city manager, but my guess is they're asking for direction and then it'll be voted on the floor, I'm assuming.
Well, I think that's an important question, and certainly procedurally, if you have a preference, we could, by all means, adopt that direction. The general question tonight, I think, is with respect to that specific provider. I wouldn't say that we are going down the path at this point with regard to those kinds of sweeping changes in community development quite yet.
Okay.
But I would say that if indeed you are comfortable with a movement of this nature with regard to the scope that we're presenting this evening, it probably wouldn't hurt to put together a little resolution that gets us off in that formal direction, and the scope of which would be clearly defined in that reso.
Kyle, did you have something?
Yeah, I did. The city manager answered it somewhat, but in line with Councilwoman Sutherland's comment, I concur that this is becoming the norm. You mentioned that most people have credit cards with rewards, and I don't think the city should be eating it while everyone else gets their 2%, 3% cash back or whatever. However, if we are going to make payment by card contingent in the community development department, I would advocate against it in that scenario, since we're forcing people to pay by that method. But other than that, looks good to me. We also haven't mentioned, at least out loud, it's in the memo, but you can also pay by ACH withdrawal, which is what I do. So, check, ACH, there's other alternatives to a card. So.
And I would agree with you, but I would think if we did make it available for community development, that they should still be able to write a check and forego those fees if they choose to. I don't think they should be limited to only using a card in that department. If that's what we're going to do, then we should eat the fee. if that's the only way we're gonna let them pay. So that's my thoughts on it.
Agree.
So, anybody have anything else on this? Jill, thank you very much.
Of course, thank you.
And I guess it sounds like the council is okay with moving ahead and providing the direction to the city manager to move forward with this? Is that okay? Very good.
Will do.
All right. Moving on, we will go to Fort Casper subsidy, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. We have a third installment pertaining to the model of presentation that you're starting to get used to by now, I'm sure, wherein we are trying to bring every single recreation enterprise forward to you to discuss the nuts and bolts pertaining to the respective subsidy that's required in each of those operations. Tonight is Fort Casper's turn to have its analysis, and pursuant to that comes, of course, ideas as it relates to trimming down that subsidy and or other goals that you would consider or could consider pertaining to this operation. Zalima has been working with her team in rec and parks to go through this. We have Mr. Young here tonight, who is a vast wealth of information as it relates to Fort Casper. So feel free as you consume this information to ask questions, and if you have direction that you want to give pertaining to subsidy goals you would rather see or strategies you would like us to adopt, we would welcome that direction tonight. Or if there's more homework that you'd like us to undertake as well, we'd be happy to go in that direction too. So without further ado, if I could defer to Ms. Lopez.
Yes, please.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening, Vice Mayor, members of council. So as the city manager mentioned, tonight we'll be talking about Fort Casper Museum and some exciting things that we have going on in this operation that will hopefully result in a lower subsidy. So just to recap, our fiscal year 22, which of course ran from July of 2021 through June 30 of 2022. These are just highlights. Obviously we have more events than this, but we generally will kick off our fiscal year with Casper Collins Day. It's a very large, free to the public event that is hosted at the museum, and that was July 24th last year. From September 1st to October 15th, we focus a lot of attention on school tours. Schools are coming through, they're doing multiple tours often a day, and our museum staff as well as some of our volunteer staff really help with that effort. October 1st of every year, our fort buildings close. The museum remains open for the season, and that remains in effect through April of the next year. October 22nd of 2021 through October 30th of 2021 is when we did our weekend ghost tours. So those two weekends prior to Halloween, we bring participants to the fort. We walk around looking for paranormal activity. It's a very popular event that people really enjoy, annual, with some significant revamps coming this year that we hope will increase participation and excitement about that event. November 2021 through April of 2022. So this period of time, November through April, is when staff really spends a lot of time researching, building new exhibits, researching, cataloging, inventory that we have at the museum for our exhibits. That kind of work happens during those slower winter months. December 4th of 2021, we had our virtual Candlelight Christmas event. So during COVID, this event went virtual. Last year remained virtual. This year the plan is to have a hybrid. So it will be offered virtually for those who are not in our community, but it will be a live event here in Casper. April 15th to June 1 is another really focused time for school tours. So at the end of the school year, all the schools are coming through and exploring the museum and everything it has to offer. May 1st, fort buildings open at the museum, and the whole grounds are open for the public to see. May 5th through 7th of 2022, we had a really exciting event this year. The museum hosted the Travel Channel's psychic medium, Sarah Lemos, thank you, So that was Fort Casper Museum Association fundraiser. One of the members of the association has a personal relationship with Mrs. Lemos, and so was able to bring her here to do that fundraising event at our facility, and it was a really exciting time, sold really well, it was very popular among the participants. And then June 3rd of this year, we also had an exciting event, and there was a dedication of monument for the 250th anniversary.
Daughters of the American
The
Revolution.
Daughters of the American Revolution, thank you. Some events that aren't in here that are kind of annual include things like our Lunch and Learn, so that's a couple times a year, hosted by the Fort Casper Museum Association. Also this year, well, every year we have some random special events. One of the ones that happened this year was hosting the Oregon-California Trail Association Conference, and so we did a barbecue in the evening and some self-guided tours for that conference, and so those are pretty common sort of one-offs for us each year. In terms of recapping the fiscal year then, from a visitor and financial standpoint, we'll start with our collection. So there's about 11,000 objects in our collection, 10,000 photos, 3,000 archival records, which is our kind of miscellaneous random paper records that we have of various types, and then there are about 1,000 library history file records. More to catalog every month with new arrivals, people making donations of items that they feel pertain to the history of our area, and so we accept those, catalog them, and eventually hopefully add them to an exhibit. Only about 5 to 6% of the collection is on exhibit at any given time. Pretty popular in the museum industry.
Zulema, can we move Lisa to the upper left corner so they could see the entire subsidy chart, please? Thank you.
And of course, the collection at Fort Casper Museum really represents the history of the fort itself, of Casper, of Natrona County, and of central Wyoming. That's sort of their mission and their focus. So we did have several traveling and temporary exhibits this year. I'll highlight just a few. So J.K. Moore, those were photos that were taken at the turn of the 19th century of the Wind River Reservation. They were of people and landscapes, kind of a mix. Very nice exhibit. The Way They Saw Us was another interesting one, a collection of East Coast articles about our area. So it was kind of a perspective of how East Coasters sort of viewed us in the Wild West, so to speak. And then these asterisk ones are actually exhibits that were built by Fort Casper Museum staff, displayed in the museum for a period of time, and then will rotate around the area through partnerships where we are able to negotiate free traveling and things like that, to other museums to promote Fort Casper. So they're clearly labeled, this was created and sponsored by Fort Casper Museum, and that's a way that we can promote our museum and the things that we're doing and hopefully attract more attention to our particular area. So those are some of the exhibits that we had. So in terms of visitors and participation in FY22, we saw just over 5,000 adults. This does exclude Casper Collins Day, which shows we had about 900 visitors to that particular event. We had over 3,000 seniors over age 62 that visited the museum, and 1,500 youth outside of student programs. So we had over 1,000 students through school tours, mostly Natrona County, but some outside, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so rental admission, so when we rent the park or the multipurpose room, there's a discounted fee that people pay to view the museum grounds or the museum itself, and so that's what those rental admissions are. Interestingly enough, we had 361 people visit the museum just to go into the gift shop. So that is tracked and an interesting stat that I'll maybe touch on a little bit later. Off-site programs are 851. So this is where museum staff goes away from the museum and participates in educational programming. That includes things like book clubs, presentations that are given by our staff to various groups. The vast majority of the off-site programming happens during the winter months when the museum is closed. Discovery trunks. So if you're not familiar with discovery trunks, these are trunks, and I have a photo actually in a future slide. These are trunks of artifact replicas that are created by museum staff and then rented to schools so that the classrooms can engage without having to come to the museum. Staff works very closely with the school district and the teachers to make sure that the trunks include things that fit their curriculum and the requirements for learning standards. Then we have Casper Collins Day, which is pretty self-explanatory. Our summer free event, ghost tours. We max out at 550 tours through those 2 weekends, and so that is one that's sold out nearly every year. Candlelight Christmas, again, only virtual last year. We'll go live this year, but we had almost 1,400 virtual participants last year. And then we had 19 rentals of the multi-purpose room or the park space that the Casper Museum staff manages for rentals. So as you can see in FY22, our revenue was just under $81,000, total operating expense just over $390,000. Fairly significant subsidy, certainly from the general fund, but we did meet our subsidy goal, which was established by resolution in 2018 at 20%. Interestingly, just the way that our budgets are broken down, because Fort Casper is actually in the general fund, they receive some rental revenue that goes into the general fund's rental revenue account. And so that's tracked separately and not included in this figure, but those are revenue dollars that are specific to Fort Casper. Obviously, City Council established your goals from 2021 to 2023 to complete a broad-based study of all of the actions that can be taken to reduce the subsidy across the recreation funds, and that's what we're, of course, trying to accomplish. So these were all subsections of that goal, and so the next slide will give you the update. So part one was to complete a report of all funding sources. Perfect. Oh. Thank you. For FY23, the funding sources are quite small. So we have admissions, gift shop, purchases, then we have the rental, and then of course the general fund contribution, which in the budget as it stands right now is about 84%. So revenue sources that are not listed here that you might be wondering about, one is donations that come to the museum, and those, like, drop your dollar in here for a donation, go directly to the Fort Casper Museum Association. Also fundraising that the Museum Association does have goes directly to the association. However, our partnership with that association means that all of those dollars are invested back into Fort Casper programming and operations. And so, but it's not attributed for in our budgets necessarily. So then part B was to compile a list of adverse reactions to programs should funding be cut. And certainly we've done some extensive discussion, we've gone through extensive discussion about this and what it looks like, particularly at Fort Casper Museum. And ultimately we would have to completely eliminate any free educational programming that we offer at this time. So whether it's the school district or just allowing free admissions for various groups of people, we just wouldn't be able to offer that free programming anymore. Things like the off-site offerings that we have and free events would just not be possible. We would have to look at increasing our admission rates, and we'll go through a model that shows you what that looks like a little bit later. We discussed closing seasonally, and we discussed closing maybe our lightest day of the year during our heavier summer season. The problem with these two options is that the nature of the museum operations is that the vast majority of our costs are our personnel, full-time personnel, and our utility costs. And to preserve the artifacts in the museum, we would not be able to shut the heat off or shut the air conditioning off. We have to keep it within a certain range, and in order to continue operating a museum, you have to have full-time staff. And it would be difficult to get the caliber staff that we need on a part-time basis. and only seasonally. So these two options really don't make a lot of sense for us, considering that our discretionary spending within our budget is only about 7.5%, very, very small. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the nature of the operation. So Part C, we're going to get to in a lot more detail, but the last slide I just wanted to talk more in depth about what our strategies are that we are employing to reduce the subsidy at the museum, and that includes reducing our expenses. So credit card fees, as you can see here, were estimated for fiscal year 23 at $2,600. So we are, like the rest of the city, looking to transition those fees to our users. What exactly that looks like for us at the museum is still to be determined, but we certainly plan to reduce that expense for us moving forward. We also want to maximize our volunteer staffing, and that includes volunteers through the Fort Casper Museum Association, but it also includes maintaining the partnership we have right now with Casper College and their museum studies program, where we get unpaid interns that help pretty extensively with our collections, archiving, things like that. And then seeking grants to fund programming. So in addition to what we are able to get from the Fort Casper Museum Association, they and Fort Casper staff will continue to seek out every opportunity that we can to find funding for programming alternative to the general fund. So creating exciting traveling, or bringing in exciting traveling and temporary exhibits. So this is really an opportunity to add new content for our locals, right? So they continue to come back to the museum and see things that they haven't seen before. So that's a critical part to keeping our locals engaged. Increase and improved marketing. Really, to me, that's one of the key areas that we need to focus on. We need to make some significant improvements to our website to make it easy for people to spend their money at our museum. And that's really kind of across the board throughout recreation, but you know, through partnerships with Visit Casper, as well as the communications team that's being developed through the city manager's office, we really hope to increase and improve that marketing strategy in a way that's going to draw more people to the museum for various reasons at different times, including that gift shop piece, which we note here. Interestingly enough, like I said, 361 visitors came just to go into the gift shop. About 42% of those were through the winter months, which make me believe that maybe people are looking for unique Christmas items, and that's probably local customers, whereas, you know, the other 50+% during the heavy visitor tourism season is likely to be coming from outside of the community. So I think that there's a lot of creative things that we have done and will continue to do, themed promotions, different things that the museum staff is already doing and will continue to do to make sure that the content in the gift shop and our sales and our offerings are really attracting those customers. We want to increase park and multi-purpose room rentals. So we are currently investing some capital dollars in improving the audio-visual offerings of our multi-purpose room. So the new technology will allow for live streaming of different events out of that room more readily than it does now. It'll allow better options for people who rent the rooms for meetings to use virtual technology. I really think that will help. And of course, the marketing piece is really important too, because I think a lot of people don't realize that we have a fantastic multi-use space at the museum that is available to rent for meetings and events. And an added perk is that it usually has an exhibit in it, so you get a free exhibit viewing. And then identifying and creating and hosting more attractions and events. So the Sarah Lemos event is just one example of some creative and exciting things that we're doing, or we're partnering with the Fort Casper Museum Association to do. And so continuing to really be innovative and research opportunities to bring more attractions and events to the area are really important. We have a ton of collaborative partnerships. I was only able to fit on screen just the two, probably two of the more critical, certainly the Fort Casper Museum Association and Visit Casper, but we partner with the VFW, the Wyoming Archaeology Society, and our Casper Natrona County Library and the Natrona County School District, Natrona County Pioneers, Casper College, Historic Trails Interpretive Center, Daughters of the American Revolution, and the list goes on and on and on. So we have very important partnerships that we need to continue to leverage to work together to bring visitors to the community to see all things related to the history of our area. And then expanding the museum right now, the intention is that the Museum Association, as the fiscal arm of another group of donors, will fund an expansion to the museum that will allow for additional exhibit space. Just to show you, so unfortunately our Teams meeting is covering this up, but this is just an example of the Rock Art in Wyoming exhibit that is traveling right now. These are our discovery trunks, so pretty neat pieces of education that we share with the school district. And this is an excerpt out of True West magazine that shows the Battle of Platte Bridge and talks about that. You can learn more about that at Fort Casper Museum in Casper, Wyoming. So this was pushed through Visit Casper, put us in a national publication, and those kinds of things are going to be really important to drive business to Fort. So now we can go to the rate model that shows what we're looking at in terms of our rates. Just while we're waiting for that, I would entertain
Jai had a question for you.
Thank you,
Of course.
everybody. So just a quick question on, in terms of the different strategies that you listed there, I think that there are a lot of really good ones and seemingly promising ones. One of the things about pursuing grants and doing the research that it requires to bring in the exhibits is obviously a capacity issue. And so I'm just curious in terms of the staff that is there now and in terms of seeking out those opportunities and writing those proposals, is that capacity available?
Vice Mayor, Council Member, I want to make sure that I understand your question so that we're answering appropriately. So are you asking if the capacity is there to research and write the grants, or if the capacity is there for more content if we were to obtain grant funding?
Oh yeah, no, the former. So the personal, like the human resources to be able to do the research to bring exhibits and additional monies into the facility.
Great question. So I would honestly say among museum staff currently, where we have 3 full-time employees, not as much as we would like to. But thankfully we do have partnerships, and they have the support of other leadership and co-workers and colleagues throughout the organization that are constantly working to try to find grant opportunities. So in fact, it was the Fort Casper Museum Association that suggested that we look to save our national treasures for the grant funding that could be utilized to do the log sill replacements and, the sill log replacements and the daubing on the old fort museums, or old fort buildings. And so I think through collaboration with all of our partners, we are getting notice when grants are available that we may qualify for. And thankfully those resources are also helping us to write the grants.
Thanks.
Kyle?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Zulema, for all the information. Couple questions. One, do you know if museum staff has ever explored partnering with Serve Wyoming to utilize AmeriCorps volunteers or resources through that organization?
Vice Mayor, Council Member, so I do know that we have researched some agencies that solely exist to provide volunteer service. In the past, there have been some challenges through our human resources in making sure that those volunteers are vetted appropriately, but I think that we're getting to a place where we are able to utilize them as long as they're meeting all of the requirements that we have internally to keep our employees and our property safe. So I think there definitely are more opportunities that we will be seeking now that we've got some kind of ground rules in place regarding our volunteers.
Thank you. Follow up,
Please.
if I may, Vice Mayor. Thanks. Not so much a question, just I would concur with the observation you made earlier that the fort needs probably an expanded or dedicated website. I guess I didn't realize we've only really allotted them like a page on the city's website. I guess they got a little bit more than that, but it's pretty hard to find, it's pretty clunky. It's certainly nothing compared to like the Historic Trail Center, which obviously they probably got some resources that are not available to us, but yeah, with like the ghost tours and stuff, the fact that folks have to call and pay over the phone or show up at the fort to get those tickets and can't do it online or something, I think there's a lot of potential there, so I would just advocate that we definitely explore that route.
Mr. Cathy?
Thank you. And I know if Ray were here, he might remember it. Caneen, you might. But before, was it the Tripany drugstore that wanted to donate? Well, you remember it. Whatever wound up coming of that, and would that be part of, did we accept the donation?
Vice Mayor, council member, yes, the Tripany collection is part of our collection that is not currently out.
Okay.
It's in storage, awaiting new space to be able to display it.
And I was gonna say, is that what the foundation then might, for the expansion type? Okay.
Yes, sir. And currently they have raised, they have pledged or cash on hand about $500,000 towards the expansion.
Okay, thank you.
Pete, could you please go back to the previous screen?
To the problem?
Presentation.
Yep. I just want to hit on something and ask a few questions while we have that up, especially with the gentleman that's here from the museum as well.
So, here?
Yep, right there. Thank you. So last week, the council was presented with an opportunity on a sculpture, and the city had narrowed it down to what they thought was the best place for it. And the council concurred for several reasons. One was the amazing amount of parking that would be there. The other was the amazing amount of additional traffic that it was going to bring to the museum. And our job as a council, as far as I could see it, is to bring these subsidies down and find ways to make these revenue generators to make it better for the city and for the taxpayer as well. Now, I received a couple emails concerning the particular piece of ground that we were talking about putting that on. And I'm curious, from a museum standpoint, based on these goals, increasing attractions and events, getting more people in the door, I'm really curious what the museum thinks about that situation.
Vice Mayor, thank you for that question. I think, as I mentioned last week, my staff found out about the proposal very shortly before the meeting, and the Museum Association didn't know anything prior to that meeting last week. And so we have not had an opportunity to sit down as a collaborative group and discuss the opportunity and what that looks like for us. And so I would hate to speak for the Museum Association. You know, certainly if Rick wants to add, I would allow him to do so, but you know, I think that the association and the staff would just want to respect the mission of the museum, which is, you know, to educate people on the history of our area. And so does that mean that we wouldn't accept an art installation there? Absolutely not. But I think it does mean that, like many of the council members mentioned, we need to engage our stakeholders and figure out how that best fits.
Kyle.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. To that point, in case folks on council had not seen, there was an Oil City News article last week. It looked like the vice president of the association, Joanna Wickman. So there was a well-done Oil City article about kind of the history of that area. It sounded like their concerns was that there's bodies interred in the ground there, and it sounds like there was also a concern about the wind sculpture not being in line, I guess, with the mission, goals, and vision of the Fort Casper. Just you know, it's a historical site, and this sculpture is not historical. And so I noticed that article get published last week after our meeting. And I don't know if she was speaking for the entire association. That's certainly the impression I got, but it sounded like the association was not for putting the sculpture there for a variety of reasons, including the fact that there's remains in the area, and it doesn't necessarily, I don't think they would say it complements what they're doing over at the museum. So.
And I think that's fair, and I will tell you, I'm torn for multiple reasons, but the top two for me are, number one, it's a really good way to bring the subsidy down and get people into the museum. But number two, we darn sure don't want to put a sculpture on top of a gravesite either. And I don't think any of us were aware that there was a gravesite there at the time that we gave direction on that. And so I wish there was another piece of ground around that museum that would still work, because whether we like it or not, those windmills are part of our history, and they're going to be a very large part of our history, because you can't look any direction outside of the middle of this city and not see a windmill in the air. So it's all historical, no matter how you look at it. But we certainly can't be putting it on top of a graveyard. But if you look at the impact that it had on the other communities that have things like these, and the amount of tourism and money that it brings into the community that would draw right to that museum, it's really, really, it puts us in a really difficult spot. So my hope is that Zulema, when you meet with the staff and the folks at the museum on the board, that they take all of that into account, and maybe there's a way to appease everybody here. I don't know if that's possible or not, but I would urge you to, I guess at least from my perspective, to see if there's something like that we can do. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. I appreciate you bringing that point up. And I just want to be emphatic about the idea that staff would not recommend building a sculpture or any type of installation over a burial site. And so I got to tell you, I'm not real convinced that the parking lot, the gravel parking lot, is a burial site. I don't think it is. But it's adjacent to one. And if that detracts from the sacred nature of that area, I completely understand that too. But I like your point about the role that energy is having in the history and the development of our community. I think that's an important concept to be aware of and be cognizant of as we think about locations for this thing. Because certainly, if we need to do more homework in locating this installation, by all means, we will do that. But I also concur that there are very few spaces that the city has control of that have infrastructure in place that wouldn't require major construction on the part of the city to participate in order to accommodate an iconic piece that this possibly could represent. So clearly we've got more work to do. I am looking forward to the partnership proposals that perhaps we can garner as we visit with our stakeholders. But more to do on this project, without a doubt.
Without question. Well, one of the biggest things this particular council has taken on is subsidies. That's why we're having this meeting right now. We're trying to find ways to curb these subsidies. The Ford Wyoming Center, the Recreation Center, the museum. And, we're getting some help in some private areas, like the soon to come complex that'll be built up by the event center. That's only going to help those subsidies up there. And I really encourage that board to find a way somehow to get this near the museum, because the amount of people it's going to bring, it would directly impact the museum and the subsidy there. And it's really, really important. So if we just keep that in mind, I think that would be fantastic. Do we have any more questions, Chai?
I did, and maybe if this is premature, we can hold it, but I thought I saw in one of the charts that the proposed subsidy, or the expected anticipated subsidy for 2023 is less than 20%. Did I read that right in one of the charts there? Oh, that one? Yeah.
Right, so, as it's budgeted in FY twenty-three,
Mhm.
the subsidy would make up 83, almost
Okay.
84%
Okay.
of our total revenue.
Okay.
So, which means that we're only recovering about 16%.
Okay.
Now, in the rate model, I will show you how I plan to get to and hopefully beyond that
Mhm.
20% in a more optimized scenario. And then we'll also talk about how we could potentially go beyond that in the future as well.
Okay.
But yeah, as budgeted now, we're not gonna quite make that target, but I think we can.
Can I follow up?
Please.
Okay, just as a follow-up, I was just looking at, I mean, the cost recovery since 2018, I mean, other than between 2018 and 2019, I mean, has increased and as you mentioned, we met that. So what shifted to make you think that we wouldn't continue to see that cost recovery increase at the same rate?
Councilmember, I think that we were probably overly conservative in our budget estimates for revenue. And consider again that we work on budgets in February and March.
Mhm.
So we were not able to see the early season impact through June 30, and the kind of fruits of our labor, so to speak, from some of the programming that we had already planned to do with the fort. And so when we look at where we ended FY 23, or excuse me, FY 22, we are much more confident that we can hit that 20 and go beyond.
Okay, cool, yeah.
Let's hold, let's go ahead and let her get to the rate model. Kyle, can you hold on to your question, and then we'll finish up with whatever questions we have. We'll have you folks next.
Okay, so I think I'd like to start with current optimized. For Sharon. Doesn't look like you're sharing. Councilmember Anderson.
Yeah, she's down there.
We're just moving her all over the place.
Can she see?
She's down there, but it's not sharing.
I don't think
It'll
it's
say sharing at the top.
Aw. Lisa, if you only knew, we're moving you all over this screen so we could see things.
I'm gathering that.
How you doing with yours? You better. Oh, yeah. If we were in the other room. Just saying. Oh, that's true. We were in
So
the other
we're
room.
gonna be emailing Councilmember difference in the spreadsheets.
It was. Yeah, it was.
Okay, so should I run it?
So apparently it was good in there, or better. In here it was great. Oh, good. Yeah.
All right, it sounds like we will be emailing the council member the spreadsheet so she can follow along with us. So under the current optimized tab, I'll show you, so if you reduce down so we can see all four quadrants. Okay, so hopefully this looks familiar. It's the same kind of format that we utilized for Hogadon. Seemed fairly effective. You guys seem to understand and appreciate it, so we wanted to replicate. So this is current FY23 budget based on FY22 attendance numbers at the museum. So we're making some assumptions, and then again, as currently budgeted, we're looking at a 16.1% cost recovery, and our goal is of course 20. So when we tweak the model, slightly, I think we're able to hit that 20% pretty easily. So one is to reduce those operation costs, right? So do something with our credit card fees that's a little different. Look at our non-full-time staffing, hopefully use those volunteers to the best of our effort and reduce those costs. So here comes down our operational cost a little bit. Here we look at maybe potentially new revenue sources. So we're talking about possibly another event similar to Sarah Lemos or something like that, really bringing in just a modest amount of money to get us there, as well as a sponsorship, likely not for the facility necessarily, but for an event or an exhibit. Sponsorship dollars are out there, and we're currently engaging some partners to help us with that. So again, a pretty modest amount, but increase in revenue that was not budgeted of about $2,000. And then the rest is really kind of hinging on what we believe we can accomplish through improved marketing. And that, again, is utilizing the great communications team that Jolene and Carter have developed in the city manager's office, as well as a continued strong partnership with Visit Casper and some of our other partners like the Interpretive Trail Center, just really driving those visitors to the museum. So Pete, if you scroll down, there we go. So this is where we show what changes we might make, and then over to the left shows what that does to the pricing. And here you'll see we're really not proposing much in the way of price increases because we've already budgeted for FY23. So we're really looking at driving business to the museum at again, a fairly modest rate of 5% increase in our attendance. The one increase we are looking at here, and this 150 is actually an average. So currently, it is free for children 12 and under to enter the museum. The idea is that we would change this teen admission to more of a youth admission rate, go kids 6 and under free, and then kids 7 to 17 are paying the youth rate at $3. So we're assuming about half of these attendees are kids that would be paying in that youth rate rather than stroller age kids coming into the museum with mom and dad or grandma and grandpa. So that's where that modest increase comes from, but that's something that we can change quickly to help boost revenues a little bit, but yeah, remain well within museum standards. And then Discovery trunk rentals. So as you saw in the picture, we have several Discovery trunks that we share with the school district. Fantastic educational tools. Right now, we only charge the schools $2 for a 7-day rental of those trunks, and they're reaching 1,300 students. So we really feel like we should probably be charging more considering the investment of time the staff puts into creating those trunks and all of the educational materials that go. So here we're just talking a very modest $3 to make it a $5 rental, which equates to about $1 a day that they have it. And then lastly, we're looking at increasing our rentals of the multi-purpose room, which are split into half-day and full-day rentals, increasing our park rentals by just four a year, and we think that's totally doable with good marketing. As well as really encouraging our park staff and our recreation staff to drive people to Fort Casper Park and Centennial Park when they're calling and requesting rentals for parks that are already full. It's a beautiful area, a really great place to go have a picnic or an event. And so driving that business there, we think we can do that pretty easily. And then the gift shop increase, although 25% sounds pretty high, again, that budget number was established in March before we had the start of our tourist season at the gift shop. And so really this only accounts for about $2,500 more in revenue than we ended the year FY22. So we think this is very accomplishable to get us to our cost recovery of 20%, which is our target. Now, if we want to do better than that, then we need to start talking about some more significant adjustments. So 40% cost recovery means we're improving by double. So instead of recovering 20%, we're going to try to recover double of that, 40%, which, by the way, for a museum is actually really, really high. but we're absolutely working in that direction. And so, but in order to do that, then we're gonna have to look at rate increases. It's very unlikely that we will be able to get to that figure without some increases in our rates. So, if you scroll over then, because I want them to be able to see what the impact is of the rate. Perfect. So, up above, and I won't make him scroll again, we did sort of increase or get a little bit more aggressive in what we could maybe bring in events and sponsorships. Okay, so we will tackle that a little bit more to add that additional revenue. The operational cost reduction, again, we have so little fluff that we're not going to see much more than that in any given year. But then, we accomplish the additional revenue likely through rate increases. So, sorry, Pete, thank you. So again, we're really then focusing on not only increasing our rates, but getting our attendance up. We have to, under this model, in order for us to get to 40%, we have to 1.5 times our visitors to the museum. I think that could be possible depending on the creative, events and different things that we can undergo. But in addition to that, we will have to look at rate increases and really try to think strategically in a way that's not going to completely price us out of getting any customers at all. And so here we're looking at an adult rate for daily admission of $8, seniors $5, teens, or that youth rate actually would then become $5, with kids 6 and under free. Currently we only charge $1 per student that has a guided tour with their class through the museum, so increasing that to $5 per student. Classes also come through the museum without a guided tour, and so just increasing that rate just slightly because they don't have staff giving them a tour necessarily. Moving that Discovery Trunk rate up to $20 instead of $2. Increasing ghost tour tickets from $9, which they currently are, to $15. Again, that is an SCMA fundraiser, and we split that revenue with them, although all of it ends up coming back to the museum. So you can see the cost changes throughout, as well as really bolstering that gift shop, and visitor attendance could potentially get us to a 40% cost recovery, which is twice as good as we're doing now, or I believe that we can and should be doing now. Questions about that?
Kyle, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I had a question about the student with the guided tours. What is this distinction between students getting guided tours and the free elementary education? You mentioned as far as some of the options available to us to reduce the subsidy, getting rid of free elementary education. I guess I thought that was guided school student tours. What were you referring to with the free stuff?
Vice Mayor, council member, so I think that I said free educational programming. Mm-hmm. And so anybody who's coming to the museum is being educated on the museum or the history of our area. So I didn't intend that, and I apologize if that was confusing, to mean school programming. I meant that we essentially reduce all free programming throughout the museum in the various areas. So whether those are the free Casper Collins Day events, or the free book clubs that we're hosting, or the free tours, non-guided tours that the school district's getting now, all of that free programming would essentially have to be eliminated in order for us to eliminate a subsidy. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you, and follow up. The other ones, seem to be about a 200% increase. That makes sense if we're increasing cost recovery to 40%. I was curious, the student with the guided tours, though it's a 500% increase. I wonder, we may not even seriously consider a 40% cost recovery. It sounds pretty ambitious, but I guess I would just be worried about a 500% increase for rates like that, especially when the school board's under pressure to cut their funding and stuff as well. So, only observation, but again, this sounds like a very ambitious model. So,
I do appreciate that feedback, and certainly, if we were going to come with a recommendation like this, we would vet this a little further.
Sure.
This is just to sort of illustrate what it might take in order for us to get there.
Well, as a follow-up to Kyle, the council's directive was 20%, so I don't think anybody's asking for a 40%. Just to be clear.
Vice Mayor, I appreciate that. Our council goals did ask us to identify what it would look like if the subsidy was eliminated or if the general fund contribution was reduced. So that is, I mean, we're trying to meet the council goal of educating you on what this might look like for the operation.
Sure.
And
Well,
so that's a good segue, I guess, into what no subsidy.
Doesn't
might
that all
look
come
like.
down to getting people in the door?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's where the marketing, I think, becomes critical. That's where the website becomes critical. You know, educating people on what we offer there already that they may not know about and be interested in is really, really important. Again, in just fulfilling the homework assignment to look at if there were no subsidy at this facility, scroll down a page, because really we're looking at 900% increase. We would have to charge adults $40 at the door to get in order to have zero subsidy. So not realistic, but we wanted to show you what that looks like because that's what was asked of us. So.
And we appreciate you doing the homework. Thank you. Is there any more questions for Zulema? Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Along with the website, I think that will be one of the key things, the website for marketing. Have you thought about putting online sales for the gift shop? I know with the way the internet is now, people, I mean, Bill Cody Museum, everybody does online gift shop, so I think that would be another way of bringing in some more money.
Kyle?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. To that point, yeah, I think if we have booths out in the community that we're doing educational program or whatever, it might behoove us to bring some of that gift shop stuff. I'm on the board of the Science Zone, it's the local children's museum, and we do that when we have booths at Ford Wyoming Center events and stuff. We bring a bunch of our gift shop with us, and strangely enough, our gift shop sales have been crushing it the past year or two also, so I don't know what's going on there, but I'll take it. This is completely just to satiate my curiosity. I was curious, Zulema, if you knew, or I apologize, sir, I forgot your name. What was it?
Rick.
Rick. Looks like the museum was built in 1982. I'm just curious what the cost was at that time, especially if you can provide it in real-time kind of metrics.
Vice Mayor, council member, don't remember off the top of my head, but I can, I think it's in your current business plan. And certainly can tell you that it was funded by 1 cent number 10. Is that 4? Okay. All right, see, I was off.
Thank you.
Prior to the museum being built, the exhibits were kept in the old Fort buildings, and so the museum just allowed an exhibit.
Thank you. Just in terms of the website, do you have a plan? Like, is that something that's going to be under construction soon? Or?
Vice Mayor, council member, I can't say honestly that we have a solid plan just yet. I'm not a web expert, nor is my staff, although they really try hard to be. We would have to rely heavily on our partners throughout the city, and particularly in the city manager's office to help us with that and IT.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Just feedback. This is great. I think we've always probably undercharged in this area, and to see you guys focusing on this a little bit is awesome. I would probably pay $10 to go in, and if we got a liquor license there, we'd probably have a lot more business.
We
like
probably have a lot more destroyed artifacts as well.
No, this is great. Thanks for doing it.
Coffee shop.
Right?
There you go.
Yeah, we need more coffee shops in this town. Anyway, Zulema, thank you for all your hard work. We sure appreciate you. Mr. City Manager, do you have anything else?
Well, Mr. Vice Mayor, thank you. I think in order to sort of close the loop on this conversation, what I'd really like to do is, as with the other user group focused areas of our operations, dive deeper into some of these proposals and bring back a revised business plan, if you will, that pushes the envelope some and gives you some things to think about by way of directions you may want to go with this operation. And so I would suggest you should expect to see that with each of these discussions, so that we don't leave it at the philosophic, sort of theoretic discussion level, but rather an implementation level that hopefully produces results.
And I don't want to beat the drum any more than I have tonight already, but your answer to my question about how do we get more money in the coffers, it's getting people in the door. And the museum's been presented with a pretty unique opportunity to bring a whole lot of people in the door. Let's see if we could find a way to marry those and really help everybody. I think it's a win-win. I truly do. With that said, I don't know what direction you'd be looking for, Mr. City Manager.
Well, Mr. Vice Mayor, thank you for that question. I think of what I would say is if there are particular suggestions of the discussion that Zulema presented tonight that you all have a real concerted interest in, we'd be pleased to take that direction. Otherwise, we'll continue to work on revising our business plan and bringing that back to you at some point with a proposal that we would generate.
I think that's probably more in line with what the council would look for is exactly that.
Okay, very good.
Are you guys okay with that? Okay. All right, thank you, Zulema. We're going to move on, but we're going to change the order a little bit so that we can help our folks get home to their families. So we're going to switch Amendment A with the alarm ordinance, and so we'll go on to Amendment A, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I appreciate that. Council has had a number of questions about this topic, and certainly as it relates to your individual conversations with the public, as you get questions and work to educate those you come in contact with, we thought it'd be helpful to present some information as we understand it, to try to provide some educational information for you to use as it relates to some of the understanding as it pertains to Amendment A and what really Amendment A means in terms of the question that the voters will have to evaluate in November. And so Jill has been working on some of these discussion points and factual information, and has turned to the investment committee, members of which we have here joining us tonight, which we appreciate, thank you, to again share data and provide some basic information about what this proposal is all about. Ms. Jones.
Mayor, City Council, would you pull up for me the investment analysis? So again, this is something that we presented to the Finance Committee back in July. So I'm going to kind of focus on this, and then I'm going to ask our Investment Advisory Committee to give us some pros and cons and information on why we think this 10% number is a real number. So first of all, the amendment hasn't passed. So as far as, do we know exactly what type of program this is going to be? We don't. Do we know exactly how it's all going to come together? We don't. But we've made some pretty good, I think, we've come up with some pretty good ideas of how we think it's going to be. So we believe that it will be run by the state. We will not be doing day trading or anything like that. We also believe that we have this as like a YO-Star 3. That may not be what it's called, but we believe it will be like an investment pool at the state level that would just have equities in it. So when I talk about equity investments, I'm talking about corporate stocks, okay, just to be clear. So when we looked at our May investments, this was what we had. So this was what we earned, and if you annualize it, you get that number. So if we were to take this and rebalance our portfolio to include 20% to be invested in equities, and again, that's just a number that we came up with that we thought was fairly conservative. The state can invest up to 70% in equities. So the state hasn't given us any guidance, so we thought we'd start with the 20%. So if we rebalance our portfolio to where we have this as our 20% in equities, we believe that we can increase our return significantly. Now, when you look at these numbers, I want to be really clear. This is not something that on day one, we put the money in and we're going to generate this kind of income. It doesn't work that way. The equities are based on how long you hold them. So if we were to buy them today and sell them tomorrow, we'd probably lose money just because the market's like that. If we were to buy them back when the state first started doing this in 1996 and sell it today, we'd probably make money. So, so that's just kind of how we could potentially make money on this. I would like to call the investment committee though, if they would come up and kind of talk about how we believe that this is a possibility. Fleur, would you also pull up the the S&P 500 slide? So I'd like to introduce these guys. This is Brenda Janikowski and Bill Thompson, and they are serving on our investment advisory committee. So.
Mr. Vice Mayor, Mr. City Manager, Council, my name is Brenda Janikowski. I am a personal financial advisor with Buckingham Strategic Wealth. I have been in this business since 1996. I've been with Connie in a fee-only fiduciary capacity since 2005. What a fiduciary fee-only capacity means is that our client's best interest is always served first. When Jill invited Bill and I to be on the council, and one of our third committee people could not be here due to a personal family member or emergency, we wanted to participate. We wanted to help the city in any way that we could, and to put the city goals in the highlight of our assistance, I guess. What the S&P 500 does, which is different than the investments that you currently are allowed to do. So currently you can only invest in bonds, which if you loan somebody money, they pay you interest. It is a set rate of interest. When you step out of that purview and you take on more of an ownership interest, which Jill alluded to in corporate stocks, it's common stock, then you own a piece of how that company does. If the company does well, you earn money. If the company does not do well, you may not earn money. In the structure of a portfolio, part of the money would be invested in our current safe investments of bonds. Part of the money would be invested in the S&P 500. This is simply a slide that shows how often the S&P 500 is positive, and then how often it is negative, and when it is negative, how much it's negative. So this is not a every year we gain 1%, every year we get the number that Jill showed you. This is over time, on average, in the years when we're earning 32% or 26% or 29% in that portfolio, you would take those gains off the table. So if you start with $1 million in a portfolio and it goes up by 32% at the end of that year, you would sell that off. Put that in the safe part of the portfolio that then adds to however you guys choose to do that, to either general funding or adds to the safe investment part, and then that's a balance of the risk. Now we would wait till it got to 32%. Part of my job for my clients and what we would advocate for the city is that you set targets. If this were to go up by 5%, we take that 5% off the table. It goes up by another 5%, we take that off the table. When something like this year happens, where the market started up here and we are down now over 20%, the reverse occurs. And you take money out of the safe part and you invest it into the ownership part because it is on sale. So you buy as it goes down, you sell as it goes up, and following a very disciplined approach, this is how you can utilize the ups and downs in the market over the long term to your advantage. So we do not expect that you invest $1 million at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year, we would get a 10% rate of return, we would take that out, and that would be able to be spent. It is a long-term, many-year strategy, but we do anticipate, as you can see from the chart, that more often than not, it would be positive for the city. And it is one of the few ways, as you guys have heard from Fort Casper, and I'm sure from many other of your entities, the only way that they get to increase their revenue is to increase what they charge other people. The city is much the same in that you guys earn money from utilities, taxes, that kind of thing. This is a potential way to increase the revenue and increase the amount available to spend without having to get money from someone else, from your constituents, in the form of additional revenues or taxes.
Questions? Kyle?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And thank you for the presentation. I'll
I'd like
admit,
to mention one more thing if I could. It sounds like there's not gonna be a lot of advertising on this because the city manager has mentioned that you can't go out and start talking this up to service clubs. And as a result, I mean, it took a long time for Stan Smith to get the investments, the permanent mineral royalty fund to get equities in there. It took him like 6 to 8 to 10 years. So I'm thinking what we need to do, I guess what we need to do is you folks are not you're not paid by the city. Can they not go out and talk to service clubs and say how important this thing is? Can they do that?
Please.
As a city councilman?
Mr. Vice Mayor, I think the only role that anybody affiliated with the city can take is that of an educational role, and not an advocacy role.
Okay, so, and I think this is what Brenda's what we're trying to do is give you the background, the information, so when you go in front of these boards, and you get the Lions and Rotary and these folks, and get the word out there somehow, because I'm not sure it's gonna pass unless you get it. I mean, this is down market. 2 years ago, it might have had a chance, but it took Stan like 8 or 10 years to get it through, 20 years ago. So, I mean, I guess that's my question to you, is would you all have an interest in getting more information from us to where you can go out to service clubs and talk this thing up to where, at least in this county, and maybe you can talk to the other counties, your compadres in the other cities and counties around here, to get this thing talked up. We only have like about 6 weeks left, right? Or
Mike, part of the issue is our hands are really quite tied.
Yeah.
We've been advised by our city attorney, and we can't be in an advocacy situation whatsoever, educational only. And we all know with Amendment A, if people, when they come to that on the ballot, don't understand it or haven't researched it and don't mark any box, it's a no vote.
Yeah.
So the likelihood truly of it passing without being able to get out and advocate for it is going to be extremely difficult.
But let me ask this question. Can you not go out and say this is for informational purposes only? This is what this has done over the past few years. This is how it could improve our budgets if we have this, I'm not saying we should do it or not do it, but this is a good way to possibly formulate, everybody gets a little bit more money out of this. I mean, this is what it's all been about. I think this is why probably this amendment came forward the last couple of years, is because everybody's been losing out on this. They feel like they've been losing out on this opportunity to make money through the market. Now, we know it's not that way this year, and look at all the black dots. Even all those positive years, it has black dots that are negative. So it's like, can we not somehow get out there to the service clubs and just say, in a non-denominational way, is say, hey, this is what, I just want to inform you what's going on, and there's a possibility we can make, can you not do something like that?
As a private citizen, we can advocate, but not as a representative of the council or of the city. And that's a really fine line. And generally, our city manager is the one that is invited by these service clubs.
Sure.
So he's generally the one to do that. I know when I'm on the street, and I've had several conversations, and I do advocate for it as a private citizen, because it's certainly going to help our tax base, but it's a really fine line that we have to be very, very careful with, unfortunately.
With that. I understand that, but I mean, it's also the amendment reads extremely poorly. It's
Yes,
a
it does.
really difficult
Yes, it
amendment to read
does.
through.
I'm
And
with
even
you,
the
I'm very
word-
frustrated.
Yeah, and I don't know who write those things, but they,
I agree. Kyle, you had a question, yes?
I did. Thank you, Vice Mayor, and thank you for the information. I also share your frustrations. I was complaining as recently as last week that the 1 cent's been around since 1976, and half of our residents still don't understand how that works, so something entirely new. Yeah, I mean, I feel very much handcuffed and unable to educate people about the issue, so I share your frustrations. I'm very naive to investing and stock market and everything, and so as a very naive person, it sounds good to me that, you know, we're investing in corporate bonds that are just grade A or higher, limiting maturity to 5 years, reducing exposure to any single issuer to just 5% of total portfolio, limiting corporate bonds to 20% of entire portfolio. That all seems like it makes sense to me and mitigates our risk. My question, though, is, well, it's more so a question from one of our constituents that emailed us who understands this issue, I think, more than I do. If you don't mind addressing a couple of the concerns he brought up, he's emailed us on several occasions in regards to financial investments and stuff like that. So one of his concerns was that there's an A-rated restriction at the time of purchase that allows the city to hold specific bonds or notes if the rating drops to BBB or lower upon consultation with the city financial director. And so his concern was that you could purchase bonds or notes at an A rating or above, but if they drop below, we didn't have a firm mechanism to get rid of those. And so I was just curious what your thoughts are on that. His suggestion was some sort of if a bond or a note drops below an A rating, that we set a time period, such as 3 months, to sell that bond or note. Curious if you folks have any sort of input on that.
So if I could kind of answer that one?
Sure.
We would actually leave it up to our financial advisor. So our financial advisor is through FID, and they monitor those. So as we buy a bond at a rating, and if it were to drop, like the constituent was saying, he would either recommend to sell it or to hold it, and we would have to look at it from there.
Okay.
and that question actually came up when we were discussing with our manager.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear. I wonder if I'm sure it got passed along. Another one of the concerns he had was the weighted average maturity must not exceed 5 years. His issue was that you could have bonds or notes that mature within 1 to 2 years, and others that mature in 10 years to get that weighted 5-year average. However, if you had a 10-year bond or note and it's downgraded from A to a lower rating, that was one of his concerns, is that the weighted maturity could allow us to hold bonds for potentially longer than we might. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that was, again, going back to what Jill was saying, we discussed that with the manager, and I think we leave it to them and I think that's the safety part of it, is Jill's not required. All we have to do is meet with these folks every 3 months, review the reports every month, and then count on them to do the heavy lifting for us.
Mayor, one other item is, we actually want our bonds to be kind of laddered. So, we don't want all the bonds to come due at 1 year, or at 3 years, or at 5 years. So we do want a wide variety of maturities. So, if the bond drops below a certain rating, however, the financial advisor would contact us and we would make a decision whether to hold it. Is it gonna come back up, or is it truly a junk bond, and we would get rid of it? Great question.
Thank you.
Your constituent is contacting you. Sometimes they'll buy mortgage securities in there that might have a 15 to 20 to 30 year final term on it, but generally, because mortgages get paid off quicker than that, their average life is like 3 to 5 years. It depends upon the bond, but maybe like 3 to 5 years. So sometimes if you're just looking at a specific bond, you say 6% due July of 31 or July of 2051. What's the city doing with that? What if you look a little bit deeper, you'll find out the way the mortgage is paying off, it's going to come due. You're going to get all your principal and interest back within a shorter period of time, 3 to 5 years or 8 to 10 years, whatever manager buys. Does that make some sense?
Yes, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for our financial group? Thank you, folks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll all be sitting with our fingers crossed, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, gosh.
Mr.
Sorry.
City, yes.
I do have a question.
Shoot.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Are you aware how much the state invests in these? I mean, you said that it was allotted up to 70%, but do you know
It
the
looks like it is pretty much 70% is
Okay.
what the numbers we have from the state.
So we're 0, and the state's at 70%.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
One thing I failed to mention, I apologize, is that the annual average return over all of these time periods is 12.3%.
You know, and to that point, if I could make one last thing, the average return 12.3, after inflation's adjusted since 1957, is 8.5%. So that's a huge number for the city. I mean, that's just tremendous. I mean, right now inflation's running at, was it 8 or 9% now?
Yeah.
And a couple years ago it was 2 or 3%. So that's a great number, but even adjusted for inflation, that sure helps pay the bills and increases all.
So this is truly just educational, that we have an opportunity over the long term to earn more money. And if there's any questions, I would offer, you know, for you guys after this, if you think of something, please feel free, Jill has our contact information, to reach out to us. If there's anything that you would find that would be helpful for you to educate your constituents, or any other questions that occur to you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Bill and I and Kermit are all here, you know, just to help.
I do have one more follow-up. Well, one clarifying statement and then a follow-up question, if that's okay. So just clarifying that this amendment will, the only change in the Constitution is allowing the city to do exactly what the state is already doing. So that's true, right?
To a lesser degree.
Yeah, to a lesser degree though. My question on the other slide where you had shown the difference in terms of what our return on investment would be if we were allotted that theoretical WildStar 3. So you mentioned that it would take some time to build to that kind of return. I know that we're guesstimating at this point, but what would you guess that time frame might be to get to that additional $4 million, I think-ish, return?
Pick a year.
It's just
I mean,
completely.
that is truly, so the biggest con or the biggest downside, in my personal opinion, to adding equities is that it does take education. If you get a negative 37% return the first year that you do that, obviously you don't get any money. So it depends totally upon market performance, which is completely out of your control. To Bill's point in talking about the laddered CD, you can mitigate your risk in interest rates going up or down by having a certain amount of money come due every year. This, you cannot, but the market does, So it may be, we achieve that in 1 year. It may be an average over 3 years or 5 years. We just don't know where we are in the market cycle currently and when it would be approved, and then how much longer it would take, once it's even approved, if it is, for then the rules to come out and theoretical WildStar 3 to even be created.
Isn't it true, though, if this were to pass, we're coming into a really good time to be buying here in the next.
I think so.
Absolutely. So, I mean, in my own portfolio, it's been wonderful right now, and it's only going to get better for a little bit. So, anyway, any more questions? No? Okay, well, thank you folks very much, and thank you for waiting. I'm sorry it took so long to get to you.
This is fine.
Thank you.
I just hope it passes.
Yeah, you and me both.
Thank you.
Mr. City Manager, it looks like the chief's back there chomping at the bit to talk to us about alarm ordinance changes.
Yes, sir, and just to remind you, this is really a follow-up visit with you pertaining to previous discussions on the very same topic. You gave us a little homework, some thoughts to consider, and having done that, we'd like to come back, return a report with you, and see what your final direction would be on this matter. And so if I could turn the time to the chief, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor, Council, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today. For those of you that are recently joining the council, for about a year, the Casper Police Department has been working on the overall response to false alarms in our community. Put bluntly, the police officers are spending a lot of time responding to alarms that aren't factual alarms. Well into the high 90 percentile, 99.2% of them turn out to be false. And so we're, under our current ordinances, City Council was kind of tasked with setting up a fee on how to deal with that, but Council had not done that for several years. And somewhere along the line, Council had directed the police department, well, for the time being, let's quit finding people while we work this out, but it never got revisited. And so in the meantime, those false alarms just continue to grow because there's no reason for people to fix the problems that we're responding to. And in fact, this year, over last year, false alarms are up over 40% because it just continues to get worse. And so the Casper Police Department really sat down and tried to find ways to mitigate this drain on our resources. And so when I first approached council just a short time ago, I had personally taken our ordinances and kind of drafted some edits to it to kind of bring us up to date, kind of applied some best guesses on how council would like to treat businesses. You know, but we were trying to be overly generous to the businesses, and as you know, I was offering them up to 6 false alarms before we got serious about it. And that's where we last left it. And so in the interim, what the police department has done is we convened a stakeholders meeting. We sent out invitations to our alarm industry professionals within our community. We sent out invitations to business owners, you know, those actual alarm users, to trying to get everybody around the table and to discuss how do we make this better so that the businesses thrive and prosper, but the police department's not squandering its time on this where we should be preventing other crimes. In addition to that, there has been an amazing abundance of, just recently, in fact, just a few months ago, the latest edition of peer-reviewed research has been published on other cities, how they are addressing these problems. And so, in fact, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area commissioned a very thoroughly researched study that really corresponded to the other ones that are listed in the memorandum today. The net result of all of that peer-reviewed research is that there was 2 overall findings. First of all, that the vast majority of alarm owners are not the problem. The vast majority of them never have a single alarm call during the entire year. And then when you add in the ones that only had 1 alarm call during the entire year, you got the vast majority of them. So the research really pointed out it's really a handful of problem children, like is always the case, that are creating this problem. The second finding was that so the research really pointed to deal with the problems, not with the rest of the alarm holders. The second finding was that offering leniency to those problem alarm users is not it's actually counterproductive. And so the research strongly recommended not giving large amounts of freebies to them. So, you know, 4 and 5 free responses to a false alarm. What the research found was that you really got to get on them very early. So we then, the stakeholders group then looked at the alarm industry, had partnered with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, because this is a problem that manifests in many communities. The International Association of Chiefs of Police, or IACP, really had a vested interest in freeing up resources across the nation. Between the alarm industry and the IACP, they kind of promulgated a new model ordinance. So when we got to looking at that new model ordinance, it was kind of designed to meet the needs of every city in the nation. We realized that our old Chapter 8 is 8.08 is really so outdated that it just wasn't worth trying to edit those individual things, and that we were much better off taking a fresh start and a fresh look at it. So what you have before you today is taking that recommended model policy by the alarm industry and by the IACP, and it has been adapted to the needs of the city of Casper. So in the end, we're accomplishing a lot of the goals that we're trying to do, which is that alarm companies that service, install, and market alarm packages are vested in making sure that they have a product that they've educated the user on. They're vested in installing it correctly so that it doesn't have and generate false alarms. It really works to that. When it comes to the occurrence of false alarms, you'll see that we've made 2 significant changes. So just out of an abundance of caution and not wanting to be too heavy-handed, what's recommended to you today is that we will give businesses or permitted alarm holders up to 2 false alarms in a 12-month calendar year. But on that 3rd one, we're going to start fining them, and fine is not the correct word. I apologize. There would be a service fee attached to those false alarms as they occur, and it would increase with the more false alarms that they have. The second major change is our existing ordinance does not only addresses private intrusion alarms, and those aren't my only problem. I also have a significant problem with what is called hold-up alarms, panic alarms, duress alarms. That's the alarm when somebody pushes that alarm. That's the one where all police work stops in the city of Casper. Whatever we're doing, we stop what we're doing and we respond to that, because that's the signal that somebody's life is in imminent danger. So there's an armed robbery at the bank. We're being kidnapped and held against our will in our home, that type of thing. Just like the private intrusion alarms, the vast majority of the ones that we get from this are also false. And in fact, when we did the research, we couldn't find a single one that turned out to be an actual hold-up type of emergency. There were a couple that we gave credence to that were, well, I thought the guy looked hinky, and so I wanted to be careful. At an abundance of caution, I pushed it. What happens on the alternative is that an employee is not trained on, hey, what's that button under the counter? And they're like, hey, what is that? I wonder what that does, and they hit it. And then the police officers arrive and we're pointing guns at everybody, and we've traumatized everybody. The other ones are the clerk is given one to wear on a necklace or around them, but it's not a 2-button activation. It's just a single button, and they are just stocking the shelves, and they pick up a box and it hits the button, and nobody knows that now the police are coming. And so in this particular case, this ordinance recommends that we as a city council, we as a city organization recognize that these are far more egregious than the standard false alarm. This costs more in police response. It is a disruption to public safety services. And so there's only one false alarm one allowed on this, and the fines start heavier and increase to a higher degree to really encourage compliance with making sure that your employees are educated, when is appropriate use of this, when it is not, how to activate it. Also, the ordinance requires the two-button activations to cut down on those accidental ones. So in the end, we have the support of our alarm industry here in our community. We met with 3 of those companies. They're going to show up if council chooses to proceed with this recommended ordinance change. They're going to show up and they're going to speak very favorably of this. They believe is in the best interest of the city, the police department, their clients, and their business. So with that, I would entertain any questions that you may have.
Mr. Gamros.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and thank you, Chief. I wanted to quickly reiterate for the record, because we have discussed this before, and some of the things that weren't mentioned tonight. You did mention the 99.2%. So since 2017, 6,182 private intrusion calls, 6,131 were false alarms. So, of the over 6,000, only about 50 of them were legit. So I was pretty blown away with how with how many there are. And as you said, it's a huge waste of resources. These calls require at least 30 minutes of staff time. That includes the dispatcher, 2 police officers at 15 minutes each, having to respond to those. That's 3,200 hours over the course of that time of wasted time in your department. In addition to wear and tear on vehicles, the promotion of quote-unquote false encouragement in officers. If they respond to one of these calls and 99 out of 100 times it's false, the one time it is real, they're going to be walking in maybe less prepared or less ready than they should be, just based on all of these false alarms. So pretty egregious. I think it absolutely needs addressed, and I'm totally on board with most of the revisions to the ordinance. I especially like the idea of folks being put on a do not respond list until they take courses or some other sort of corrective action once they've kind of gone over a threshold. I like that idea because, like you said, it's people, it's the problem children. My guess is it's probably an 80-20 rule. 20% of the people are responsible for at least 80% of the situations. I did have a couple questions, though, about the proposed ordinance. For clarification, is it true that every residential alarm owner would have to file for an annual permit and pay the $25 for their own home security system? And in addition, would they also need an uninterruptible power supply for that alarm system?
Vice Mayor, Councilman,
Please.
The way this is written is that if you have your own alarm system that alerts you on your phone, you know, hey, there's movement in the house or a door has been opened, but does not alert the police department, you do not need to register that. You don't file a permit for that. You don't get permitted for that. There's nothing. The city is not going to regulate that. If, however, your alarm system notifies dispatch that there is an emergency the police needs to respond to, that is what you have to permit that. You have to do that annually. You do pay that permit fee to do that on that annual basis, that $25 fee.
Thank you. Follow up if I may.
Please.
Thank you. Kind of a two-part question. Do you have any idea how many folks in town have that sort of home security system that is tied to dispatch that alerts you when something's going on? And second part of that question, what to you is the benefit of those folks permitting those? What does the permitting process offer beyond, above and beyond just us simply documenting when people have these false incidents and either not responding or passing along service fees to them? What is the benefit of permitting above and beyond that? Thank you.
Vice Mayor, Councilman, so the vast majority of these ones that have contact with the police dispatch, those are done through alarm service companies. So very rarely does a do-it-yourselfer have in their home a system that dials 911 figuratively. For that. The vast majority of them go through a company such as the very successful and popular Comtronics here in our community. They retain them to install them, to service them, and to maintain them. Those are the critical things. The benefit that we have by encouraging this is that alarm company is the first step of it. So when the alarm notifies them there's a problem at the Smith home or the Johnson business, what they do is they immediately contact their responsible people for that alarm and verify, hey, is this a false alarm? And so we already eliminate a lot of those false alarms by this mandatory confirmation that is placed on the alarm service company. It's the service that those citizens or business owners are paying for, is for them to doubly make sure, okay, is this an issue? And then they facilitate that police response as a function of the premium that alarm owner is paying them for their monthly service or their annual service, whatever it may be. Another benefit that we have from this is that by enacting this and dealing with these people is that it affords us the opportunity for them on an annual basis and whenever things change to update their contact list. So the Johnson business fired their manager. They brought in a temporary assistant manager And now the alarm goes off, and the police dispatchers contact them, but we contact that fire manager because nobody updated that information, and then we're left kind of scrambling. Police officers are hanging out at the scene, wasting even more time. And so the beauty of this system is that by facilitating with the alarm company and these permitted holders, is we get those updated contact information. So it requires them on the annual basis to reaffirm this contact list is good. And if it's changed, it also requires them to notify us within 30 days of a change in that contact thing, so that we can mitigate the amount of time that we're wasting trying to hunt down other people. We call them up, the phone number's disconnected, we go to the next one, they don't work there anymore. We go to the third one, I don't work there anymore, but I think so-and-so does. We wake them up. And by that time, we could have cleared that scene a long time ago. So the police department gets a lot of benefit from this, but a more dynamic and fluid efficiency of operations is really what we're aiming for.
Thank you.
Chief, I have a couple of questions. One is, I have a pretty intricate system at my house, and we've had a couple false alarms, but my monitoring company calls me and, hey, are you guys okay, right? But how do I know if my company has registered with the city as you're requiring them to do? And if they don't, what does that mean for me, since I already own the system and have quite a bit of money tied up in it?
Vice Mayor, council members, a good what-if scenario. And so, I would like to report to you that we have a very strong working. The effort of producing this draft ordinance for this group has really solidified the relationship that we have with them. They actually have buy-in. So there is provisions in this ordinance that requires them to update and facilitate these things with our city so that we're getting that information. They have to do it. And if they fail to do that, we also have provisions in there to assess fees, civil fees to them.
So to Vivint, for instance?
Yes.
Okay, very good. That answered my question. Steve, you had a question?
Well, I was gonna head along that same line. So you mentioned Vivint, Simply Safe. They also provide the monitoring service, but that is a DIY. Now, how have they been, and do you find, and this isn't specifically with them, I use them as you threw out automated electronics here, but have you found that the DIYs that are doing this have more of the false alarms than the company installed systems?
Vice Mayor, Council, I want to be abundantly clear.
I know you're not advocating for anybody.
No, sure. False alarms at homes are not what's driving this conversation.
Okay.
It's the false alarms at the businesses. The businesses that take no steps to rectify the problem.
Okay.
The businesses that refuse, once my officers get there and point out the problem, that refuse to do it because they just don't care. Those are the ones that are squandering our time. So
okay.
Those, throughout this new ordinance, when somebody, even if they're on the do not respond list, if they hit the panic button, they hit the hold up alarm, the duress button, we're going to go, even if they're on the do not respond. It's the vast majority of the issues that are driving this conversation are the businesses that just don't care. The corporate offices in Milwaukee, and the local manager goes, no skin off my teeth. They're not sending me a bill. What do I care?
It's his cost of doing business, so it's reducing his bottom line. So he's trying to do everything he can.
So what we want to do is we want to stop those repeat. So I do get false alarms at homes. It's a minuscule percentage of the problem. This is really, we're trying to address all of these things. We don't want to increase that percentage, so that's the permitting process, the process by which we have valid contact information, a process by which they affirm on an annual basis, yep, all of this is still good, and we have some provisions in there for them to maintain their system. But really, what we're trying to accomplish is what's driving the false alarm police responses. Those businesses that we go 30 times a year to, there was one not too long ago, 28 times in 1 month.
Wow.
You know, on the 29th, the police officer is not going to be believing, okay, there's going to be an armed assailant in there trying to open the cash register with a crowbar. The officers are just going to be habituated to it's another false alarm, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
John?
Thanks. Just a quick point of clarification. So the person responsible for obtaining the permit is either the business owner or the homeowner. Is that correct? Or you said something about the company.
The company also has to register. Their fee is $100 to
Okay.
register with the city.
Okay.
And then the business owner or the homeowner, the way I read it, is $25 annually.
Okay. Correct.
Is that
Vice
right,
Mayor,
Chief?
you know, so the understanding of this ordinance is that that alarm service company will also facilitate the timely and efficient permitting of the system that they've installed, that they maintain, and that they charge for.
Okay.
And so it's got provisions in there and the working knowledge of the alarm system group of, that they've got a vested interest in making sure that this runs smoothly. So they actually have provisions in there to facilitate making sure that we have good contact information, that the alarm user, they have got a vested interest in sending them a reminder, hey, it's November, you know, you might want to think about getting your permit application in for next year.
Okay.
Well, if
Thank
I
you.
read this correctly, like let's just say Vivint, because that's who I use. They could have 2,000 customers in the Casper area, but they only pay one $100 register fee with the city, not $100 for each one they do. So it's certainly amenable for them to do it and to be into compliance quite easily. So, and $25 a year isn't much for me to register my system. I'm not opposed to that. Do you have any more questions for the chief concerning the alarm ordinance? If not, Mr. City Manager, do you have anything else?
Mr. Vice Mayor, all we really need to know is if council's comfortable with us bringing it to the floor for first reading consideration.
Everybody okay with that? Okay. sounds good.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Chief. Thanks for your
Thank
time.
you.
Moving on, we will go to agenda review. Mr. City Manager, we are cooking through this tonight, so make sure Ray knows that this was ran efficiently and quickly.
Absolutely. So referring to your grid document that it appears everybody has in front of you, it's this one right here. Few things I would want to bring to your attention. Our first meeting in October is Tuesday, and you can see the pre-meeting items, if you will, that we have slated for that evening. A couple other things I'd bring to your attention, though. We also have an agreement with the City of Mills as it relates to providing shelter services for their animals. Coming your way for formal consideration. Won't be a whole lot different than what you saw with the town of Evansville. We also have the lease for the Wilo complex. I believe the last time they were here they referred to it as the ranch, if I remember correctly. And so that is on your docket for consideration on a formal basis. Should be a one-time reading unless council has things that you need done with it as a part of your consideration.
Are we talking about the land up at the event center, by the event center?
That is correct. Okay. Yes, sir. That's exactly right.
Thank you.
The other thing I would bring to your attention, we had a conversation recently with the library with regard to the story walk. That formal agreement is coming forward on the 4th as well. Moving on to the work session, you'll notice the items for the 11th slated. At this point, one of the larger items of consideration, I suppose, would be the non-discrimination ordinance that the attorney's office has been working very hard on with the LGBTQ committee as well. And so that will come forward in work session format in preparation for first reading, sometime later in the year. Another installment of subsidy discussions will also be slated for the 11th. This time, however, will be with the ice arena in that operation. And we'll try to squeeze in expansion conversation as a part of that discussion as well. Moving on to the work session of the 25th, aquatics will have their turn that evening. We will also talk about the process for the 1 cent award piece, if you will, that will take place pending potential approval in November of the 1 cent 17 proposal. However, process discussion would be really helpful for us if indeed we can have that talk on the 25th. We are booked up throughout the rest of the year as far as work sessions go, but I want to direct your attention to the back page for future agenda items. We've been trying to remove those items that we docket with your blessing on the body of the grid document here. However, if you see items on the, or I should say, if you don't see items that are docketed and you don't see them on the back page, let us know so that we can make sure we haven't let something fall through the cracks, or that just simply needs direction from the council to keep moving. And so with that, Mr. Vice Mayor, I defer the floor.
Let's keep in mind October 11th, that work session is slated to go until almost 10 o'clock that evening, so I believe they're going to supply pizza or something equivalent to that so that you're all not starving, and I'm not starving.
Correct.
Because I'm starting to put my weight back on, and I'll be pretty damn hungry. So. But just so you know, that should be entertained for that evening.
Absolutely.
And anybody else, any questions on the agenda review? Okay, let's move on. Do you have anything for legislative review?
I do not, no sir.
Okay, well, with that said then, let's move to council around the table. Kylene, did I say that right?
Close enough, it's all good.
How do you say it?
Canine.
Canine. Forgive me, I apologize.
No, you're fine. I'm used to it. I don't have anything. I didn't make it to the health department board, but the surgery went well and a little sore, but got use of all my fingers, so life is good. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Kyle?
Thank you, Mayor. A few things. Went to Fall Fest last Saturday. Had great weather, great turnout. David Street had a little train that drove around, had horse-drawn carriages, face painting, dancing studio performances, a quill played. Backwards was there with some seasonal drinks, so really fun day. They did end up in the round of 20 finalists for the Levitt Foundation grant, so just crossing fingers at this point that they get awarded a grant. I think they did really, performed really strong on all the metrics. They had a great social campaign, had, Pistol Pete and Jeffree Star and a whole bunch of other people take part in a campaign to vote for David Street, so I'm hopeful that we end up with some grant funding. That'd be awesome. New fire engines were dedicated and placed in their respective garage bays last week during the washdown and push-in ceremony. Captain Dean Brennan came out of retirement to assist with the ceremony despite being in his 80s now, or 90s now. So that was really fun. There's a video on the Casper Fire Facebook page if you're interested. Also last Wednesday, we had several police officers get recognized for their 20-plus years of service. Lieutenant Jeffrey Bullard, Sergeant Zachary Winter, Officer Darren Douglas, and Officer Terry Jackson. Congratulations. Thank you for your 20-plus years of service. And I think that is it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I was at the Old Yellowstone District meeting yesterday. We discussed the summer street projects. Supposed to be wrapping up by October 15th. We did get our new street banner design updates, and those will be being hung here soon down in the Old Yellowstone District. They're pretty cool looking banners.
Excellent.
So they were delivered yesterday, so they should be being hung soon. And then we had a discussion about the concert event issues downtown with the loud noise for some of the neighborhood people, and Chief McFeeters met with the involved parties, and looks like that's came to some good resolutions on some of those issues. So
good.
And that was all we did there, and that's all I've got.
Excellent, well, thank you. Jai?
Thanks. Just a few things from me. I just wanted to again congratulate Chief Black, our new.
You took one of mine.
Yay, that's always my goal. No, we can all congratulate you, but congratulations.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that there's a ceremony tomorrow at 2:30 in the council meeting room, which is
Right
it?
here.
I'm always confused on what this
Will there
room
be
is called.
whiskey
So here in this room.
Will there be whiskey for them? No, I'm not kidding. Not kidding.
So congratulations, and thank you for stepping into that role for our community.
Do we wash down and push you into, or is that, do we wash down and push you into?
Yeah.
Let's not.
So, hearkening back to a conversation, I don't know if I should have brought this up in meeting follow-up or earlier, but I guess just as it relates to the wind sculpture and our considerations for the location, I think it's quite apparent that there needs to be more conversation there. I've raised this privately and I've received some calls, and I think it's really coming from a good place. Everybody, I haven't necessarily heard negative reactions to the idea itself, but definitely as it relates to the proposed location and how we retain, the history and what many have referred to as kind of the sacred location of that site. So I just, I don't necessarily want to hinder progress on the idea itself, but I definitely want to make sure that we have the conversations we need to have in order to find the right location for that project. So my last one is I attended again another meeting of the Natrona County Interceptor meeting, which is a group of various community stakeholders, including fire, including police, and many other at the hospital, who are working together to try to address some issues as they relate to behavioral health, substance abuse, recidivism in the community. And it's been ongoing for several months, and so I just wanted to provide an update because I think I'm kind of attending as a citizen, but also with my city mind, my hat on, and there's been some really good progress. There's now a case manager that's been hired to help manage people who are re-entering society from incarceration. There's also work on trying to figure out one of the biggest gaps that's been identified is just the issue we have with indigent people who don't have insurance being able to access these detox facilities and then treatment and follow on resources. And so part of the conversation there has been about how we use or how we could potentially use some of the opioid funds from the settlement that are coming in, but also I think even more than just the money itself, really thinking proactively about partnership with the county and even potentially with the state to figure out what we might do. The money on an annual basis is really not enough to meet and address the need that we have in our community, but it doesn't mean that there aren't ways that we can partner and potentially establish some creative solutions for mitigating some of those gaps that are really causing, first order, second order, third order effects in our health and our justice system, as well as just, the benefit of our citizens. So I'm just saying this as an update. I know on our upcoming, not yet dated, we've got the detox funding discussion listed there. So I'd love to still have that conversation during a work session at some point. But I'll just continue to kind of provide updates here too, because I think we're to the point of potentially being able to engage city representatives, county representatives, as well as some of the newly elected state legislators when they come through. So I just don't want to miss the opportunity for us to think critically about what we can really do to meet that need.
Could we possibly add that to our future agenda items?
Mr. Vice Mayor, I think it is on the back page. Did you say you saw it?
The detox funding specifically, that conversation is there. So, and I'm not sure it makes sense to have that right now because there's still some thinking going on. But I do believe that there will be an invitation to city, to county, and to state legislators maybe for the month of November to attend a meeting to learn and to begin to dive into what some of those partnerships could look like. So. It's a lot of moving pieces, and I really only hit a snippet of it, but it's been really cool to see people show up and really try to think through these issues. And it's clear that we have a lot of caring people in our community, a lot of thoughtful people, and that there's really this effort's underway to make that gap close and to really serve our people as best we can. So that was long-winded, but I'm done. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Kathy?
Yeah.
Called everybody else by their first name, and you call me Mister?
I believe I called you Mr. Gamroth earlier, didn't I? Steve, what do you got?
There you go. Thank you, Stevie.
I didn't mean any disrespect.
No, Mr. Kathy was my dad. I attended the Warstown push-ins at the fire stations, and I noticed, as Councilmember Gamroth pointed out, on their Facebook page, they showed one of the retirees, but they used the retirees for most of their Warstown ceremonies. And that's to get them and keep them involved in the fire department, because that is a part of their family. And if you just walk out and go away, it leaves a big vacuum in there. And so they're trying to keep the people involved so they don't wind up with the, what am I going to do now, which is back again to the mental health aspect of the city and everything. And I think that's a great program. But one of the firefighters that I was visiting with that mentioned that was part of why they were there and what they were doing. So I was really glad to see that as well. And by the way, for those that looked at some of those Facebook posts, I am not Assistant Chief Siplon's father and have not spent 20 years on the fire department. Because yes, as the side joke, I got a call from my son, and he says, "What's up with this?" And then the picture and the caption, he says, "Now I know why you're always so tired and so out of breath all the time."
And now I know why you said Mr. Kathy is your father. I get it now.
And I am not Chief Siplon's father. So several of us, I think, got a laugh out of that one.
We cleaned that up quick.
Do what?
We cleaned that up quick.
Oh, did you? Okay. But yeah, but that was the biggie. And the one other thing, and I think we all got a notice of it, but I believe it is on the 11th of next month is the Governor's Mental Health Symposium at the NIC from 7 to 5. And so that's another aspect of this mental health stuff. But I think that ought to be brought up as well. So.
I think they're on a wait list at this point, but.
Do what?
I think registrations are at capacity. You got to go on a wait list now.
I believe we as council people were invited though.
But yeah, I saw it was sold out. So yeah, I didn't know what to make of that. Still, it's something that is happening here in town, and it is very much needed along those lines of mental health, because that is on everybody's mind right now.
Yes, it is. That it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. A couple things for me. One is on the mental health aspect. I was going to see if we could get some type of an update from the chief. It's been about a year, I believe, really close since Lieutenant Dundas passed. And I know we had a big mental health discussion and a push at that time to getting our people that care. And so I'd like to see a year later where we're at with that, what kind of steps we've made, and what kind of care we are providing for our people at this point. With inflation going, I'm sure it's still taxing. And I know we've had two officer shootings resulted in death, and which brings me to the point, I've gotten a lot of emails over that for some reason in opposition, and I take the stance, if you pull a gun on one of our officers, then I guess you get what you get. I don't know how else to put it. You shouldn't be doing that, and our officers are trained and they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do to protect our community. So you want to do bad things, I guess you can pay the price. So also, I got my parking permit today, and I see it's number 005. So I'm assuming I'm only the 5th one to buy one. And I think there's a whole lot more people that need to get out and get these. They are available now. you can call into the engineer's office at the city, and they will come out and do an assessment on your place, and if you are eligible, they will issue your permit for $25. So after all of the hubbub concerning that, they are now available, so go get them. Those of you that are parking in parkways without that permit will be getting ticketed. That's the directive this council gave, so go get your permit. You had something else?
Yes, I had one other thing. When you mentioned the city engineer's office, have they been getting many calls about Blue Peak?
Mr. Vice Mayor, Councilman, I'd have to double check as to what that might look like. But I think there certainly has been some. I don't know if we could characterize it as a lot, but I'll follow up.
Okay, I was curious because I know that was kind of what was mentioned as the first line of response was to visit with them, and that's kind of what I've been telling people that have asked me about.
I got a couple more things. Everybody knows I have a country western band, and I'm playing a benefit this weekend in Hudson, Wyoming for a little girl that got ran over in the early morning hours before school in a crosswalk. Son was in the perpetrator's face. They never saw her. They ran her over and they drug her. It took passerbys screaming and honking and running this person down to get her to stop. He didn't even realize he'd hit her. She was so little, and he drugged her. Anyway, I almost saw it happen on CY the other morning, and a concerned person saw it, and they literally pulled their car in front of them. They were going to get hit, but they saved that little girl. And it just reminds me that we just got to slow down a little bit. It just breaks my heart. That little girl's really hurt. So we got to pay more attention when we're in our vehicles and we're drinking our coffee and looking at our phones and listening to the radio and thinking about our day. Just remember, it's just terrible. See you tomorrow at 2:30 for your indoctrination. Congratulations. And we will hold a regular city council meeting next Tuesday at 6 o'clock. So we'll see you all then, and be safe. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.